afraid, I always think the classical sources, you got to read them a little bit with a little bit of doubt, a few grains of sand in taking them. So we have, sorry, my finger got too far ahead. Josephus, a Hellenistic Jew writing in the first century of the Common Era, describes the city of Babylon, making use of information from Berosus. Now, Berosus was a Babylonian, a priest of the main god of Babylon, Marduk, and he lived around about 300 BCE. He wrote a history of Babylon, the Babyloniaca, about 290 BC. And unfortunately, it's not preserved. We only have quotations from it in other classical writers. And here again, we hear about the city. We hear about the wall. He built a triple wall around the inner city and a triple wall around the outer city, etc. He talks about making it a brick, building a new palace. This is Nebuchadnezzar building this. And we do have a description of the Hanging Gardens. In this palace, he had high stone terraces built that give the appearance of being mountains planted with all kinds of trees. He had constructed and prepared what are called the Hanging Gardens for his wife, who had a love of the mountains since she had grown up in Media, which is really in Persia. Now, just note in passing, that the palace with which this garden is associated took 15 days to build only. Now just sort of keep that in mind, in your mind. Okay, as the clicker is not going to work for us. Now, another description of it from Diodorus Siculus in the 1st century before the Common Era. There was also beside the Acropolis the Hanging Garden, as it is called, which was built not by Semiramis, but by a later Syrian king to please one of his concubines. For she, they say, being a Persian by race and longing for the meadows of her mountains, asked the king to imitate, through the artifice of a planted garden, the distinctive landscape of Persia. The park extended 4 plethora on a side, and since the approach to the garden sloped like a hillside, and the several parts of the structure rose from one another, tier on tier, the appearance of the whole resembled that of a theater. If you can think of a Greek theater, you think of a semicircle with very steep seating. Now, so we have some descriptions of it. There's several more, but I won't bother you with reading those. Now, Berosus, who was a Babylonian, assigned the Hanging Gardens to Nebuchadnezzar. Now, who was Nebuchadnezzar and when was he? Well, here we have sort of a time chart. And you can see that he's a long, long time ago, over 2.5 millennium ago. And I always just since I deal with the cuneiform documents, to indicate when did writing begin? A long, long time ago. So Nebuchadnezzar is further away from the beginning of writing and history in Mesopotamia than it is from today, basically. Now, who was Nebuchadnezzar again? Now, many of you may know about him. He appears in the Bible in numerous places, particularly in the book of Daniel, although admittedly there he's often confused with the last ruler of the Neo-Babylonian dynasty, a man by the name of Nabonidus. He was the second in the line of rulers who gained their independence from Assyria. And he's left us a lot of documents, a vast, vast number of documents, written on clay cylinders, clay tablets, written on stone, written on bricks. We have a number of them in the museum, and in the Babylonian section we have a very lovely cylinder of his. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't describe anything about Babylon. It describes the building of a temple at a nearby city. It's interesting, however, that in some of his inscriptions, such as this one that's found in the British Museum, the East India House inscription, in describing the building of his palace, he states he did it in 15 days. Now, why do I emphasize that? Because Berosus had said the same thing. So this means that Berosus, who lived, as I say, 300 BC when he's writing, clearly had access to this type document and was using cuneiform sources. We know he could read cuneiform. That's not a problem. The last written cuneiform document was 76 AD, sorry, not 75. Used to be 75. Recently they found another one, 76 AD. So cuneiform was still being written. So clearly, he comes from Babylon. He was a priest of the temple there. He wrote a history of Babylonia. And he clearly has access to traditions, if not reading. So I must admit, I tend to give greater credence to a Babylonian about the Tower of Babylon, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, than I do to these foreign Greeks. Now, I do acknowledge that at the time of Berosus, Babylonia was ruled by Greeks. We're in the Hellenistic period. Alexander the Great has come through, conquered as far as the Indus. He's dead at this point. He died in Babylon. We'll come back to that. And Mesopotamia, Babylon, is ruled by one of his generals, or actually by a descendant of one of his generals at the time of Berosus. So actually the Babyloniaca was written in Greek, and then was referenced in Greek by Josephus and various other classical writers. What did Nebuchadnezzar look like? The one responsible for, according to Berosus. Well, we have one image of him. This is the only one I know. I'm sorry, it's not very clear, but you see a man with sort of a pointy hat holding a staff or spear in one hand. And what you may not see is the ziggurat of Babylon and an outline here. And actually the inscription on this document, which is off in Oslo in Norway, describes the building of the ziggurat and other works at Babylon. You may wonder where the name Nebuchadnezzar comes from. Names mean things in most languages, and his name means, "O Nabu, protect my son." Nabu is the god of writing and the son of the patron deity of Babylon, Marduk. Nebuchadnezzar left us a lot of documents. He created the largest empire that Babylon ever held. Controlling from into southern Iran over here, all the way over to the border of Egypt there, going well up into Turkey. Carchemish is right on the border of Turkey and Syria. A very, very large empire, the largest empire that Babylonia had ever controlled. Now, we know mainly about Nebuchadnezzar from the Bible, where he's talked about in the book of Daniel, but in various ways. But we're particularly hear about him in his campaigns in 597 and 586, where he went and conquered Jerusalem, the kingdom of Judah, where he removed the king in 597, put a new one on, and then in 586 destroyed the city, destroyed the Temple of Solomon, and carried off the Judeans into captivity, the Babylonian captivity. So he goes down really rather negative, shall we say, press in the ancient world. This type thing of carrying people off in exile, typical thing in the ancient world. The Hittites did it back in the middle of the millennium earlier. The Assyrians before the Babylonians did it over 150 times to various different people. After you defeat them, to pacify them, you move them to another area, so they have to build new lives for themselves. They can't be worried about doing nasty things, rebelling, and because they have new neighbors, they're uncertain, so they're going to be quiet is the idea. So actually, the Babylonian captivity, and actually the lost 10 tribes of Israel earlier by the Assyrians, were very, very typical procedures in the ancient world to rule conquered people. We hear about the exile from the Book of Kings and also from the Book of Chronicles, how the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, came and took Jehoiakim of Judah, carried him off, and as well looted the Temple of Solomon, and then on another occasion destroyed it. So he took them into captivity. We hear about this from the biblical account, which many of you are still quite aware of. But we actually have cuneiform sources which support this as well. The Babylonian Chronicle, which describes sort of a series of major events in various years of a long series of kings, mentions that actually, it only mentions the one, the very first one, I do acknowledge, in 598-97, how the king of Akkad, which is the term they use for Babylonia, marched to Hatu, which means the west, encamped against the city of Judah, captured it, seized its king, appointed a king of his own choice, which is exactly what it says in the Bible, and took vast tribute back to Babylon. So we actually do have cuneiform sources of this. And I thought you might be interested. Actually, the Judean king was not treated badly when he was taken off to Babylon. We actually have ration documents found in Babylon, and where they're found we'll come back to later, issuing lists of rations of oil generally, but of some other commodities to various hostages, captives there. We have references to the son of the king of Judah, references to people from Byblos and Arvad along the Mediterranean coast, Greeks, and also the son of the king of Judah. 5 sons of the king of Judah. So we actually have an reference to the king of Judah as well. So we know of the king of Judah being held captive there. Now, you may well know that one of the great treasures of the Babylonian section of this museum is a group of documents from the Marashu collection. And in these documents, dated generally from the 5th century BCE, we have actually references from the site of Nippur, where Penn excavated back in the 1800s, to individuals with Hebraic names, as found here. So we have a lot of material in our collection dealing with in the Judean exiles in Babylonia.